I am sure by now you guys have seen what happened last night with Francis Ngannou. He went toe-to-toe with the greatest heavyweight boxer of our generation, perhaps the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time. It went to a split decision loss, but a lot of people in the boxing community and the MMA community said that Francis Ngannou won. But last night was an absolute disaster for the UFC. And I am going to get into all the details as to why.
Ultimate Punching?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Ultimate Punching channel. I'm Jesse, and this is your ultimate source for MMA and combat sports content. Before I get into today's, I need you guys to destroy that like button and hit that subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel. So the reason why this is an absolute disaster for the UFC is because at the end of his UFC contract, Dana White basically said that Francis Ngannou doesn't want to take a lot of risks. You know, he's not going to get a boxing match. His stock is going to go down, etc., etc. All of these things everybody thought was going to be true, including myself. About 6 months ago or so, I was believing everybody when they were saying that, oh, you know, Francis Ngannou hasn't had a fight in a little while. There's a new heavyweight champion. People forget, and I was kind of one of them. But Francis Ngannou not only got this match with Tyson Fury, but he did it in such glorious fashion last night that everybody is going to be wanting a piece of him. Now, the reason that this is an absolute disaster for the UFC is not necessarily because they lost Francis Ngannou. He could have meant big bucks for them. They could have made some huge fights between him and Jon Jones and other heavyweight contenders. There's no doubt about that. But the bigger picture here is that the UFC is an organization that basically beats all the other MMA organizations out there because of their star power and because of their dominance in the North American space. Now, there are others out there that are good. There's PFL, there's Bellator. Those two are probably going to be merging. And then there's one championship. But if Dana White and the UFC are so regimented and adamant about the fact that they won't let their stars box, and that's where all the big stars make huge money, now Francis Ngannou has shown that there is a way to go about doing this, that there is a way that you can leave the UFC, join with another MMA organization, get what you want in terms of your financial security as far as boxing goes, as far as combat sports go, and still be considered one of the biggest superstars on the planet. Now, I understand why Dana White probably didn't want him to go boxing, because we have one frame of reference to look at, and that's Conor McGregor. When Conor is the biggest star in UFC history, as I've mentioned before, if you look at the past 10 biggest pay-per-views in UFC history, I believe Conor McGregor was in 8 of them, or maybe 9 of them. He has done huge numbers for the UFC, but the problem is when he went and boxed Floyd Mayweather, he made like $100 million, and now that drive to be, making a lot of money for the UFC, winning fights, being an MMA champion, that kind of went away. I mean, if you look, he's won basically one fight since that Floyd Mayweather boxing match. And so if you look, I'm assuming what Dana's thought process was that if Francis Ngannou goes and boxes and they do some sort of co-promotion with the UFC and a boxing promotion, Francis Ngannou is going to get a huge amount of money, and then he's going to lose sort of all that drive, all that determination. He's not going to want to come and fight, etc., etc. That would be what would be in my mind in that scenario. But the problem is Dana overplayed his hand in this situation. And now, hindsight's always 20/20, of course. Nobody's going to know for sure. But at this point, now what Francis Ngannou has done is set out a roadmap for all the other mega stars in the UFC. After yesterday, we saw that Sugar Sean O'Malley, a huge rising star in the sport, is talking about doing some boxing with another star in the boxing world. And I'm sure a lot of the other stars in the UFC have seen these paydays that come from boxing and said, why not me? And so the issue Dana is going to have is all these different UFC fighters are either going to need a huge pay increase in order to discourage them from ever pursuing boxing, or they might go out into the free market and look and say, hey, if I sign with a PFL, I can do MMA, and then I can do boxing over here on the side. If I sign with one championship, championship, they might let me do boxing, and they might let me do MMA, right? And so this gives them a lot more options in terms of their financial freedom, financial stability, being able to make those huge paydays. And this puts Dana in a really bad situation, because now that Francis Ngannou has created this roadmap for other fighters to go down, Dana is, to keep his kind of monopoly on star power, he's going to need to either increase salaries, increase contracts, which the UFC probably can do, or he's going to need to be a little bit more malleable in terms of letting his stars fight and cross promote in boxing. And so I'm not really sure what steps they're going to take, because if Dana doesn't do this, then it's going to be a disaster for the UFC, because the UFC is the dominant MMA organization, 100% right now. But if they lose that star power, we've got Francis over at PFL. If they lose some of these other stars that go over to PFL, go over to Bellator and PFL are merging, so that probably won't happen. Go over to one. Now there's going to be a mix of star power and a mix of different organizations, and the other ones that give their fighters the freedom to pursue other interests like boxing, grappling, whatever the case may be, are going to be able to attract a lot more star power and grow and come and compete with the UFC when it comes to that gold standard. Now, a lot of people might say, oh, well, there's nothing as cherished as the UFC championship. And this is probably true, because the UFC has such a stacked amount of talent. But if we look, if a bunch of that stacked talent goes to places where they can make those bigger paydays, now the UFC might not be that coveted gold standard in terms of MMA dominance, MMA championship. Problem and cost the organization millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars over the next few years. What did you guys think? Did you think Francis won the fight last night? And how do you guys